Welcome, one and all, to this latest edition of the Future's So Right podcast. I am your host, Pete Beal, and this is a Green Flame Press production. So here we are, back with yet another episode. As usual, I'd like to start by thanking everyone who turned into the last episode, where we had a discussion with book coach Katie Wall. I think it was a very informative discussion, and if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, I highly recommend it. A lot of great information, along with some free resources available for authors. A lot of great stuff out there. I also want to take this chance to thank everyone who answered my poll over on Instagram about the topic of today's video. We had quite a decisive win. I put the options out there as the potential topics were traditional publishing versus self-publishing, or whether or not a self-publishing author should start their own publishing house, and just a general discussion of that area of conversation. And that was our winner. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So sit back, relax, and I hope you take a lot of good information away from this latest edition. Now, before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this topic, I thought it would be wisest to start by addressing a few groups who probably do not need to start their own publishing house. And first and foremost among these is going to be anyone pursuing traditional publishing. When you traditionally publish through a publisher, let's use Simon & Schuster as an example. When you do this, Simon & Schuster is going to be the publisher of record of your work. And so going to the trouble of forming your own publishing house in this scenario is really not going to be worth your time, resources, or effort. Another group of people who probably aren't going to need to start their own publishing house is going to be anyone who's writing more so as a hobby. Maybe they want to publish their work in small batches to give away as gifts to their family and friends, but they're not necessarily interested in making a career out of their writing. In these cases, it's also probably not the best use of their time, resources, or effort to open their own publishing house. So we just wanted to get those out of the way right out of the gate. So now that we've eliminated a few people who may not necessarily need to hear the rest of this conversation, I feel like I should give the standard disclaimers. For starters, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, and I am not giving you legal or financial advice in this podcast. This is merely meant to give you a very, let's call it a high-level overview of some potential pros, cons, and reasons. It should also be said that everything I'm going to say here is going to be geared towards my country, the United States. Each country has their own laws and regulations regarding this topic. So if you're not in the US, you may want to check your local laws. It should be noted also that even within the US, different states have different laws. So if you are in any doubt about your next courses of action, I would recommend you consult with a lawyer or a CPA to determine the best course of action for your personal case. Let's just get that out of the way. Now, to get started with this, I wanted to address one thing, and that's something that I've heard a lot of different authors say when they discuss their reasonings for wanting to open their own publishing house. And the most common reason that I hear is that it's a means of protecting themselves and their assets. Now, what this means is they feel that if they open their own publishing house, say as a limited liability or an S Corp, what's going to happen is this is going to protect them from lawsuit if anyone should happen to find a reason to file a lawsuit against them. Meaning, only the publishing house's assets would be at stake, and things like, for example, their house, their car, would not be able to be targeted in the lawsuit. Now, I've done a bit of research on this, and I've found that this does not have a lot of truth behind it. And the reason for this is because an author isn't like most other businesses. So what type of lawsuits is an author most likely to face? Well, you could potentially face a defamation lawsuit if you were to write a book saying vile and hateful things about a person. You could potentially be sued for something like copyright infringement. Now, in these cases, lawsuits are likely to be filed against both the publishing house and the author. Now, most publishing houses, and I'm talking the major ones like earlier I mentioned Simon & Schuster, they're going to have paperwork for their author to sign, essentially releasing them from any sort of liability in these situations. So in these cases, the author is still going to be responsible for their actions. Ultimately, you're responsible for the words that you put on the page. And having a publishing house of your own is not going to shield your assets if somebody should come after you and should a court find against you. I just wanted to clear the air on that because it's a bit of misinformation I see quite a few people talking about out there. So with this being said, there are certainly some benefits to starting your own publishing house. Now let's say you are to start a publishing house as what's known as an LLC. Now, LLC is probably the most common type of corporation that an author will form to start their own publishing house, and it stands for Limited Liability Company. Now, so what are some of the benefits of this? Well, one of the foremost benefits, one of the main reasons that I chose to form my own publishing house, is that it will allow you to open a business bank account. And by doing this, you can keep all of your funds for your business separate from, say, the funds that you use to pay your bills, your mortgage, your car payment, buy groceries, etc. Now, this comes in handy for a few different reasons. For one, and I think the obvious one, if you're like me and you aren't always the most organized person in the world, it helps you keep track of money that you're bringing in, money going out in terms of being related to your writing. In addition, there can be some tax benefits. And again, I'm not an accountant, and I would recommend you consult with one before taking this advice. A reminder, laws in different states can be different. But in many cases, if you have business-related expenses and you have formed an LLC, it's easier to write off those expenses on your taxes. For example, say you need to buy a printer for your author business. You could potentially write that off. Expenses such as paying for a computer even. And again, I highly recommend you consult with an accountant, especially the first time you do this, just to clarify what is and isn't considered a business expense, because you don't want to get audited. Now, you can do this without an LLC, but you do run higher risk of an audit from what I've found, because when you're paying for these things out of a personal bank account and then you're attempting to write them off on your taxes, that can flag as suspicious behavior. And I'm guessing you don't want to go through an audit. I certainly don't want to go through an audit. As lovely as the people at the IRS are to deal with, nobody wants to go through that. So why not reduce the chances of doing this? So based on everything that we've talked about so far, I think it goes without saying that starting a publishing house is probably going to be most beneficial for somebody who's hoping to make an actual career out of their writing. There are also a few other ways in which this could prove to be advantageous. For example, if you perhaps have a future goal of publishing other authors, it could be a great thing to go ahead and get started on the path of getting your own publishing house going now. If you are somebody who is hoping to have multiple income streams, the business banking that comes along with opening your own publishing house can definitely come in handy. I'll use myself for an example. Now, this podcast doesn't make any money. In fact, it loses money. But I do hope, eventually, 5, 10 years down the road, that it is a little bit of a moneymaker. And when that happens, I'll be able to funnel those incomes along with any incomes from my writing into the same account and operate it all as one business instead of keeping all these different entities separate. So you can see how that could definitely prove to be advantageous and overall just easier to manage, right? Now, there's one last area that a lot of writers take this route for, and that is to give themselves more, I would say, credibility as an author. And what I mean by that is, say you self-publish via Amazon and you take the free ISBN that they offer you. In this case, when someone goes to your Amazon listing, the publisher of record is going to be Amazon. Now, you can avoid this by purchasing your own ISBNs. This is certainly true. However, if you do this as a self-published author, having not formed your own publishing house, what's going to happen is people are going to come out, say again on Amazon, find your book, and the publisher of record is just going to be your name. For example, publisher John Smith. And this really isn't a big deal. After all, more people are self-publishing now than ever, and I expect that number to only continue to grow in the coming years. But some people, just for their own personal reasons, prefer to have a more official sounding publishing house out there. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's something that you're interested in, if that's your reasoning, I don't think there's any problem with that. So as you can see, there's a wide variety of reasons why people might be interested in opening a publishing house, and there's an equally wide array of benefits that are associated with this. So what exactly goes into the process of doing this? Because we've talked a little bit about what it can and can't do for you, and a little bit about what the potential benefits could be, but we haven't really gotten into how you actually do it. So I'm going to walk a little bit through my own experience and take a look at some information that can be found online that might help you understand exactly what you're in store for if you decide to go the route of opening your own publishing house. So what did I have to do to get my own publishing house off the ground? So for the record, I'd elected to go with an LLC, which is what most authors go with. And I live in the United States state of Idaho. So for me, the process was fairly simple. You can hire lawyers or accountants to help you with this process, and this might be beneficial if you live in a state where the process is more complex. For myself, it was very simple. There was very little work that went into it, and the entire process took maybe 1 to 2 hours of work at most. So step one was I had to name my publishing house. And so obviously I cannot have the same name as a business which is already registered in the state. Thankfully, the state has a website you can go to, and I would imagine every other state does as well, where you can look up to see if your chosen name is already taken. So once I had confirmed that my name, Green Flame Press, was not taken, I had to file with the state of Idaho. I had to request that that name then become mine. So how do I actually go about doing that? Now, the first thing in the state of Idaho that you have to do is choose what's called a registered agent. Now, a registered agent is the person, or in some cases, you can hire outside businesses to do this for you, but they're ultimately responsible for receiving any sort of legal documents on behalf of the business, They're basically the point of contact that the state would reach out to with any questions or issues. Now, while that sounds pretty complicated, it's really not, because in my case, I simply named myself the registered agent. Simple enough, right? Basically, I am the point of contact for my business to the state. So I had my name, and I had myself as the registered agent. I had to then file a certificate of organization with my state's Secretary of State. It was done online very easily. It was, I want to say it took me about 20 minutes to fill out the forms. It was very simple, and I had to pay a $100 fee. So once I had paid my fee and filled out the necessary paperwork, how long did it take? Now, according to the Secretary of State, it could take as much as 10 to 14 business days. However, my filing was actually approved the very next day. It was honestly maybe 12 hours. I filled it out at night, sent it in, and before noon the next day it was done. I would imagine some states are probably going to have a longer waiting time depending on how many requests they have at any given time. So at that point, I was officially a business owner. So what came next? Now, if you're going through the state's, at least my state, Idaho's recommended order of things, the next step would be creating an Idaho LLC operating agreement. Now, this is actually not required, at least in terms of the state. However, it was required for me to have this operating agreement in order to open my business account. Your financial institution may not necessarily require it. However, it's never a bad idea to have it on hand. I was able to get a very basic one online, which essentially it fills out, what it does is it states the name and the place of business, the name of the registered agent, the date the company was formed, various different small facts, things about records, taxes, ownership. And the main thing that you need to fill out is the purpose of the business. So in my case, what I filled in for my purpose was the purpose of the company is to engage and conduct in any and all lawful businesses, activities, or functions, and to carry on any other lawful activities in connection with or incidental to the foregoing as the members in their discretion shall determine. Blah, right? Not exactly something you're going to read for entertainment, but it gets the point across. I'm not doing anything illegal. I just want to run my business in a lawful way as I see fit. Another thing that my financial institution required was what's known as an EIN. So that stands for Employer Identification Number. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's probably because you see it on your W-2 every year if you have a primary job through an employer. And so this is a number, and it's assigned by the IRS to identify businesses for tax purposes. Think of it as your business's version of a social security number. So it's going to serve the purpose of opening your bank account, filing your taxes, etc. Now, getting an EIN, I can tell you're probably already dreading this, right? You're thinking, oh, I've got to deal with the IRS. I've got to reach out to the IRS and get this. Well, I'm here to tell you it's actually not that bad. You can get it 100% for free from the IRS. It's an extremely easy process. You can do it online. It takes a few minutes to fill out. They respond. I believe, again, it was within 3 days to me. They responded. There was no issues. They sent me the EIN and no other problems. I was actually delightfully surprised by how simple that process was. So once that was done, I was good to go, right? I had my business. I was registered with my state. I was registered with the IRS. I had my operating agreement. I could open my banking account. Everything I needed was done in about 5 or 6 steps, right? Now, that's great. But as I said earlier in the podcast, not every state in the U.S. is the same. Some states are going to have different requirements, different fees, and let's talk a little bit about some examples, okay? So, this could potentially help you determine if this is something you want to go through with, depending on where you live. In some cases, like where I live in the state of Idaho, it was incredibly easy to get started and incredibly affordable. $100 one time. I don't have to pay yearly to renew that. All I need to do is fill out a form that they will send me every year in November, because that's the anniversary of when my business was formed, and that'll be all there is to it for me. But let's just take a look at some other states and what their potential requirements are. So I have a listing pulled up here, and just for reference, my source of information is a website called llcuniversity.com. And so it has a list here of every state in the United States, plus Washington, D.C. And it just has a very basic listing of how much it costs to file and maintain an LLC. So let's look at some examples. And I'm scrolling through the list right now, and it seems that most states do have a yearly fee. The majority of them do, in addition to the first-time filing fee. Some of them have a biannual fee, so every 2 years. For example, Nebraska, state of Nebraska, requires a $105 filing fee initially, and then a $10 fee every 2 years. So that's really not so bad, right? Now, some of these can get pretty expensive. For example, the state of Massachusetts has a $500 initial filing fee, so that's already pretty steep. But then you also have to pay an additional $500 every single year. So, looking at this from my perspective at least, if I lived in the state of Massachusetts, to me, I don't know if that's going to be cost effective for me. I enjoy the perks and benefits that having an LLC gives me, but that's kind of a steep cost considering where I am in terms of getting my business up and running. That's a hard cost to justify. For example, some states, California has only a $70 initial filing fee, so that's not bad. But then you look over and you see that they require an $800 fee every single year to maintain that. There's another case where it may not necessarily be worth the cost. But some states are very affordable. Hawaii, $50 to file, $15 fee every year. Minnesota, $155 to file, no fee every year. However, similar to my situation, you have to file an information report every year. And it's similar for a few states like Mississippi and Missouri. So you can see a little bit, part of what's going to go into your decision is going to be your own geographical location. For a state like New Mexico, where it's a $50 fee, $0 annually, and you don't even have to file an information report, it could be a very easily accessible thing for you to start your own LLC and get your own publishing house up and running. On the other hand, for a state like Tennessee, where it's $300 to file and a $300 fee every single year, that might not necessarily be something that's within your financial reach. Or you may just have, limited resources and decide that there are other areas where those resources would be better allocated. So ultimately, you need to do your own research on this. You need to decide what's best for you, what the process is like in each state. I'm curious. I'm going to look at one of these. So I had mentioned that for my state, it was a very simple process to register for my LLC. I'm going to pull up one of the states that's a little bit more expensive and see if there are any differences in terms of the actual process. So I pulled up the state of Massachusetts, since that was one I noted as being more expensive. So I'm just, bear with me, I'm just reading through this really quickly. Overall, it doesn't look like a significant higher number of steps in terms of how to form the actual LLC. So that's not so bad, right? I'm just looking at a few different ones. Wow, some of them, like Maryland, look quite simple. Most states, it seems, at least the ones that I'm looking at, and I can't look at every single one, or we're going to be here for a while. It seems like the steps that you need to take to file your LLC run anywhere from 5 to 8 steps. And honestly, none of these look overly complicated in terms of the actual filing process. One thing you may want to keep in mind, if you're in a larger state with a higher population and more businesses, it may be harder to secure your LLC name. Because if more people are doing business in your state, it's more likely that that name's already going to be taken. Otherwise, I'm not seeing a lot of differences between most of these states. I pulled up Illinois because I used to live in Illinois. And I'm just sort of scrolling through their process. So you have to select your name. You have to select your registered agent. And you can be your own registered agent. It looks like some states do require the articles of organization, or this, which in my case would be the operating agreement for the state of Idaho, which wasn't actually required. Some states do actually require it, and you have to file that to the Secretary of State, it looks like. And with many states, you have to file an annual report. For my state, they actually send me what I need to fill out, and I'm guessing most states probably do this as well. And in some cases, for example here, for the state of Illinois, there's a $100 penalty if you're late filing your report. If you're more than 180 days late, they will actually dissolve your LLC and you'll have to go back through the filing process. And for most states, there is going to be a period, essentially a grace period, to fill out that report. And if you don't get that done in time, they will just dissolve your LLC. But yeah, all these processes that I've seen seem fairly similar. There's always a chance that there's some oddball state out here that has a much more complex process in terms of getting their LLCs set up. I have not run across one. I've looked at about a half dozen now, and honestly, they don't seem overly complicated. So I think the application process itself really isn't that intimidating. Some people, when you go online and you research these things, there tends to be a lot of legal, we'll call it mumbo jumbo out there, and that can be intimidating. And people think, oh my gosh, look at all these words I don't know. Look at all this legal talk. I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. Believe me, I'm the least legally intelligent person in the world. I don't know anything. But I was able to do this by myself. And I think, at least for the states that I've looked at here, most people probably can. But if you are in doubt, and you have the resources, maybe consult an attorney, consult an accountant, and see, one, if this is the correct move for you, and two, if they can help you get it set up. If it's something that you don't feel comfortable doing yourself, there's nothing wrong with that. I think ultimately this is going to come down to your financial situation, what the cost is where you live, and ultimately if it's worth it to you. If the benefits of the LLC outweigh the costs of owning it. For me, it was, but as we've stated, it is very affordable for me. In many cases, it may not necessarily be so affordable, and therefore, it may not be worth it for you. For what it's worth, I'm looking at this list again. Most states seem fairly reasonable in terms of their cost. There are a few that are a bit out there. Like Nevada wants you to pay $425 to file and $350 every year. To me, that's a little steep. But for the most part, the majority of the states, I would say, the annual fee is $100 or less every single year. The majority of them are less than $100. And there's a good handful that are $0. So that's just something to keep in mind when considering this. There is a cost associated with it, and that cost is greatly going to vary based on your physical location. So a few different things had really motivated me to make this topic one of the suggestions in the poll. And mainly it was because when I was going through this process, I had found that there wasn't a lot of consistent information out there. And the process, to me, was quite intimidating when I was researching it and determining what I wanted to do. So I hope that this helps maybe peel back some of those layers to it. And hopefully, if this is something maybe you've thought about doing, but have held back on because you feel like I felt, where it was maybe just a little bit too intimidating, this can hopefully alleviate some of those concerns. It's honestly not that complicated of a process to go through, and I also hope that maybe this has helped you determine a little bit if this is right for you or not. The thing to keep in mind is that you can be a self-published independent author without doing this. It's by no means required. There are certain benefits that some people might value more than others, and that's fine. Everyone's perspective on this is going to be a little bit different. Nothing wrong with that. So whether you were interested in opening your own publish house and have now decided not to, or maybe it was something you hadn't given a lot of thought to, but now you want to do a bit more research, I hope that you found this discussion informative. I think this is a great place to bring this episode to a close. I hope you enjoyed the content today. If you did, please make sure to give us a thumbs up and go ahead and subscribe to see future content. Also, if you're interested in being a guest, or if you have any topic suggestions, comments, questions for the podcast, you can find all of those at my website, petebeal.com. There are forms you can fill out to get a question to me, to apply to be a guest on the show. I'd love to have you. All of that's going to be linked down in the description below. We'll plan on doing another episode in about 2 weeks. I think we found a pretty good groove of doing these about bi-weekly. Maybe occasionally we'll do them more often, but I think it's a good balance. It consumes a rather large amount of my time to do these, and when I spend too much time, I'm not doing my own writing, which is very, very bad. So, let's plan on a bi-weekly schedule going forward. With that, dear listeners, I'm going to say goodbye for now. Please stay safe, stay healthy, stay creative, and always keep writing. Thank you very much.